little banner. Good morning, everyone. We're going to start here in a couple of minutes. I'm sorry, it may be a little loud. We're going to start here in a couple of minutes. So, good morning, everyone. We're going to start here. We're not necessarily having a Bible study, but we're going to have a couple of talks. Jake Leahy and Jerry. Never mind. I'm sorry. It comes with age. Is going to give us a little bit of a talk about some of the history, what they've been through, and some of the things we look forward to. I mean, in this country, the freedoms and the stuff that we have. So, Jerry, if you want to start, thank you. Naponik. I'll get it.
Is it working? Okay. Well, anyway, my name is Jerry Napomnik. I am an immigrant from Poland. I came to United States in 1959 along with my brother, Chris, and I was 20 years old when I came here. So anyway, I was debating what should I be talking about today to you, about my life in Poland or my life in the United States. Well, I decided to tell you a little bit of both. Anyway, after the war, my brother Chris and I came to Poland, of course, with kind of a broken up family. Our mother did not come with us. We didn't know where she was at the time we came to Poland, anyway. And basically, not knowing any better, we kind of figured out that this is the life it's going to be. We were there with my grandmother, and basically, my father eventually came over, from the prison. He was a prisoner in German, prisoner of war. That's what he was. Anyway, so I'm going to tell you a little bit about the life under socialism, which is basically what we hear all about it today from young people about socialism. They kind of push the issue that it would be a good thing if it was here. Well, let me assure you, if it wouldn't be a good thing if it came here. Because basically what they are explaining to me sometimes when I ask them about it, how do you feel about socialism? They say, well, this is a different socialism. This is a democratic socialism. But from my life, I can tell you there's no such thing. Socialism is socialism. And my only hope is that, and I am almost sure that it will never work in the United States because everybody here is living free. And I don't think when the chips are down, Americans will not allow this type of control to be in the country anyway. But going back to Poland, as a young kid, you don't really feel the pressure of not having much of anything, because you figure, well, that's the way it is. Everybody like that is. And the propaganda, the communist propaganda, always tell you that the life in the United States is really where white people take advantage of black people. And we were taught that from a very, very beginning, when we were in school. And religion, at first it was fine. Right after the war, we had even classes in school called religious classes, where a priest would come in and, have a religious class. Well, over time, it got eliminated. There was no longer class of any religion, any. And in every class, there was a picture of Jesus, on the front page. Well, after a while, that picture was replaced with a leader of a communist party. So this is what we were looking at all day, except some kids decided that, maybe we should throw some ink on that thing, So we kind of smashed a few little things, and of course, we were in trouble. But who was really in trouble was our parents, because every parent under that system is responsible for a kid doing something bad anyway. So, and basically living there under the socialists, you don't have any private property, okay? It's a one-party system. You're either with them or you are, if you are against them, you will be persecuted or maybe even in prison, and that is what happened to my father. My dad was pulled out of the apartment that we lived at 2 in the morning, under the suspicion that he has been involved in some kind of a killing of a communist leader, in our region. So 2 o'clock, they just come in, they knock on your door, they don't need any warrants or anything, out you go. So my father was spent about 6 months in prison, and when he went in there, he was kind of his hair was, kind of a peppery, not totally white, but when he came out, he was white. He was gray hair. So anyway, after a while, he didn't talk much about it, but in Poland at that time, we had a problem with housing. So they used to, if you lived in an apartment that was big enough, they would put maybe 2, 3 families in that apartment. Well, after my father came back, in one of the rooms in our apartment, they put in a leader of a Communist Party to keep an eye on my dad. Knowing my dad, they became friends. That's how my dad was, Anyway, but on the other hand, as far as being a child, I remember being hungry many times because everything was limited. And there was not much food, there was not much clothing. You had one pair of shoes for the longest time, and if you got little holes on the bottom of your shoe, my grandma would put a little bit of a cardboard or whatever, to keep you warm. But maybe it's not like that anymore in any of these countries, but that's how I remember. The clothing would have to be washed every day because you didn't have much. Maybe you had one pair of pants and that's it. But as far as the schooling goes for kids, when I was there, everybody had to have a uniform. You could not dress any other way unless you were in a uniform that was assigned to you. So the guys usually had either black or navy pants with white shirts, or light blue shirts. And the girls had, God, I don't even know how to describe it. They had to wear like a full-length dress, I would say, all one color. It was basically all their color was like a navy blue. And that's the way it had to be. And when we ask sometimes, what is the reason that everybody has to dress the same? They said, well, then there is no competition. You don't compete with anybody about, I'm dressed better than you. You all dress the same, and that was the reason why. Plus, it made you concentrate on schooling rather than how do I look today, Am I looking good or what? But anyway, after a while, they kind of eased up on that. But anyway, it was not easy because you had to participate in everything that Communist Party threw at you, or socialists, whether it was marching for some kind of a labor thing, or May 1st was a kind of a labor holiday, that the communists did the marching. If you remember from pictures, like in Russia, Red Square, there's a big presentation of the armed forces and so on when they march, But you had no choice. You had to participate. Now, as far as being a Christian, it was probably one of the most difficult lives, that anybody could live there under socialism. We used to get, kids used to get 1 week of, they call it recollections, where you will prepare for the birth of Christ. You used to attend church, and you were just basically like a Bible study, And that was eliminated after a while. But whenever kids had to go to church to do this recollection and prepare for Christ's resurrection, communists would throw all kinds of things at you. They would give you a free trips to another country, under the communists. They would give you all kinds of little good things that just so you can get away from there, And as far as Christian services, they were okay, Communists would allow this. It was all right. And we had one service that I will never forget. It was for kids only. In other words, let's say at 9 o'clock every Sunday, only kids were allowed in the church, no adults. So can you imagine what it was like when 1,000 kids walk into the church? There was no way to be quiet, was it? Everybody had something to say about something until the priest went up on whatever it's called, up high on the podium, and he didn't say one word. He just kept looking at us. And one by one, everybody would go, It was quiet. And, it was just an amazing thing that 1,000 kids, in my church anyway, there were at least 1,000 every Sunday, and they were ages maybe from like 5, 6 years old to 12, or maybe a little older, but it was pretty cool, actually. We liked it, because we kind of could pretend that who was in charge here, you know. The older kids, of course, were always in charge, not the little guys. Anyway, but the life was basically pretty struggling. Children didn't feel much, but the adults did, because the adults always had to be the ones to provide, you know, to make you clothing, make sure you're wearing some clothes, you know, and so on. Anyway, going forward, living there, and after about one of the days, I came home with my brother, and there's a letter from United States. And we kind of figured, what is that anyway? Well, we started reading it, and it's the letter from my mom, which we were separated from about 14 years before that. We lost her kind of during the war, you know. So after that, we basically, what we would say is, like, that's baloney, you know, it's not our mother, it's somebody's trying. Well, no, it was our mom. And then we find out that before my father passed away, his wish was that we would be reunited with my mother, and she's alive no matter what you hear. He says, I know your mother is alive. So, and that was the very first step as we started to prepare for a trip to, I guess, to be immigrant. It took about 1 year before we finally got an okay to immigrate to United States. Number one, at that time, you had to have a sponsor. In other words, you had to have somebody that would bring you to the United States and be responsible for you for the first 5 years until you could become a United States citizen, you know. Because after 5 years, you could apply for citizenship. You know, you could become a United States citizen, but you had to wait 5 years. During the 5 years when we were here in the United States, if you committed a crime, other than killing somebody, you know, or something like that, you were immediately deported. There was no questions asked. That's it, you were done. You were back to Poland, baby. And, you know, when you committed pretty, you know, like killing someone, then of course you will spend time in prison here and so on. So anyway, but that's how we started our life in the United States. And my brother says, when we came here, we said, well, this is pretty cool. Look at this. The only disappointment we had was that our stepfather, who picked us up, didn't come in a Cadillac, you know. He came with a kind of a 1956 Buick, you know. So we said, Dad, what the heck is that, you know? I mean, come on, where is your Cadillac? He says, it's parked in the garage, so don't worry. Anyway, so that was kind of a fun thing to do. But then all of a sudden, we never realized it at first, but after a while we said, this feels really free. We can say anything we want. We can do anything we want, basically, otherwise not committing any crime or bad stuff. And he says, we felt the freedom. We felt the difference, you know, that what you can or cannot do, you have choices, you know. And we started to understand the saying like, freedom is not free, you know. Maybe free as a bird, I don't know. But anyway, it was just the word that we're starting to learn what it really meant. You know, we were told about that word living in Poland, but in here it was the real meaning, you know, that we were free. Anyway, so somebody always asks me, what the first thing that impressed you the most when you came to the United States? I said, the grocery store. This was the biggest thing for me. I could come in and, you know, there's like 6 types of coffee. There is fruits everywhere, you know, there is apples, there is bananas, you know. Anything you want is right there, and just you have to choose what you want. See, I remember in Poland, my father had to stand in line at Christmas time because they were rationing, I guess, anything that came like in the form of oranges. For example, in oranges, you could only get 2 oranges, you know, per family. And you sometimes would come up to a counter and they said, we are out, sorry, but okay. But so different, you know, that Here you don't have to do anything. You just go and grab what you want, you know. And it was very, very, very rewarding, you know. And another question was asked, so what do you think about, what was your first movie that you saw when you came to the United States? My first movie was called Imitation of Life. That was the very first movie I saw in here, where a girl who was black girl, as you remember, tried to be white, you know. And I said, oh, well, the communists had something in common here because they were always preaching to us how white people were exploiting black people, you know, maybe. But it was not never sticking with us that that's the way the life is in here, anyway. And besides that, you know, another big movie that I think I must have seen about 2-3 times going in back and forth was Ten Commandments with Charlton Heston. I says, wow, that really has happened. That kind of, you know, solidified my faith, you know, that they even make a movie like that, which was under socialism, you would never see a movie about anything like that, you know. Anyway, so I just want you to know that being free means different things to different people, you know. To my brother and I, it means that we could make and shape our life exactly the way we want to, if we just put some effort to it and try. And then another thing that, of course, was that time I met my mate, Shiri, who was a young girl that I figured, boy, I had a little eye on her, you know. But I figure, I don't have a chance. You know, there's no way. Well, here we are, 48 years later. Love you. Otherwise, I joined this church because of Pastor Churchill, if you remember. And he convinced me that being a Roman Catholic is not everything else in the world. You can be a Lutheran too. Anyway, my grandmother, my father's mom, was Estonian, and she was Lutheran, and I finally understood why she was trying to convince me to become a Lutheran living in Poland. You know, Poland was like a 98% Roman Catholic. You know, anything else was just not acceptable. But anyway, so I'm Lutheran today, so I guess I fulfilled her wish anyway. But otherwise, I feel very, very blessed living in this country, believe me. And if somebody thinks that it's better someplace else, I think they should go. And, you know, and they should try. They'll be coming back here fast, so fast, it won't be even funny. When my brother and I visited Poland about 2018, it was after 60 years. Of course, Poland is free now. You know, it's a free country now. And my brother says, well, yeah, it's really nice. It's good to see. And then, to make the long story short, after we came back, he kneels down at the airport and kisses the ground. I was thinking, what is he playing? He's playing, you know, maybe a pope, because Pope did that, you know. But anyway, he says, Jerry, you know, I feel free, man. And being free is, sometimes you have to pay a price, and I think my brother and I did when we were growing up. You know, we paid the price. So anyway, anybody that tries to tell me otherwise, how bad we are here, I tell you, this is the best country in the world with all its troubles. And I firmly believe we will always be free. And socialist has no prayer in here anyway. You can take my word for it, because Americans will not allow this to happen. So thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Jerry. I was kind of amazed to hear Jerry's story, how parallel it's going to be to what I'm going to be telling you here briefly. Also, I have to tell you, I only learned that I'm supposed to do this on Thursday when I read Pastor's email. He neglected to tell me before he left that I should be talking about my experience with communism and the Soviet lifestyle, the socialist lifestyle. So if my presentation is a little disjointed, then you can blame the pastor. You know, Jerry is too modest to tell you that he was a alternate on the Polish Olympic team in 1956 to Melbourne as the run, skip, and jump event. And that's one thing about the socialist countries. They can take care or take control of your kids. His coaches saw his athletic ability, and then they just steered him to that Olympic event. You know, here in our country, we have the freedom to do whatever we want. And so actually in cases like this where you kind of have a central control of sports and children, Jerry was on that team. Unfortunately, he didn't get to participate because the actual guy made it all the way through. But I've always admired you for that, Jerry. That's quite a accomplishment. Well, my experience is not like Jerry's because he was a young man and I was an infant. So Simon, if you put, oh, you did already. Let me point out to you guys quickly here where Estonia is. It's right there. And that's one of its problems, is that it's such a strategic location that this is the Gulf of Finland, and that's St. Petersburg. And you can see it's kind of a strategic point. During the winter, St. Petersburg would freeze over, but the Baltic remained ice-free. So it was a great trading port, and for centuries, our country, Estonia, has been occupied by many different countries. Like the Danish had it, the Swedes for a long time, and then mostly the Russians coming in, because that's Russia right there. So this has been kind of the problem that Estonia has been continually occupied by different countries. But in spite of all of that, the Estonian people were able to keep their unique language and their customs and their ethnic identity. So that was a condition that my folks talked about, because both my mom and dad lived under the Tsar, Nicholas, and at that time they wanted to be sure that they Russified all of their countries that they occupied. So when my mom and dad were in school, they had to speak Russian while the state inspector was in the classroom. As soon as that inspector left, everybody switched back to Estonian. So it was kind of a cat and mouse deal that went on. And so let me see here. Oh yeah, and I wanted to point out that some countries that occupied us were actually more benevolent than others. In fact, the Swedish king who had Estonia for a couple hundred years, he was so nice that we have an expression in Estonian that when things are going good, we say, oh, those wonderful Swedish times. And we still use that expression, but things certainly changed when Sweden lost the Great Northern War to Peter the Great, and then that became the 200 years of occupancy that Estonia had under Russia. In fact, Peter the Great loved our country, our capital, so much, our capital city right there, that he built his summer home and his Orthodox church, which still stand in the capital today. But Estonia did achieve its independence after World War I. There was a great turmoil in Europe. The maps got redrawn, and Estonia, and together with Latvia and Lithuania, the three Baltic states, and Finland, all declared independence from Russia. And because Russia was going through a revolution, even Lenin approved that we got our freedom in 1918. And this was the beginning of what we call our golden age, that we were free of the Russian shackles, and Estonia just really blossomed in the economy, its culture, our language. We took down all the signs that were Russian, and so it really was a wonderful time, and the country prospered. So my grandfather, who I'm named after, had a 40-acre farm just 7 miles outside the capital. 40 acres that he maintained with his 4 daughters, the youngest, which was my mom. And they had that farm for until the Russians came back again. And I'm kind of jumping ahead here. For 20 years, until about 1938, 1939, the Germans invaded Poland. And at that time, Russia, to counter that, invaded the Baltic states and Finland to be a buffer against the encroaching German army, which they thought would happen, which certainly did. So my grandfather's farm was split up under 8 different families, and then they supposedly were supposed to farm that, and in no way did they accomplish the same productivity as my grandfather did with his 4 daughters. So this points out that without ownership, property ownership, and your equipment, no one's going to take care of things. And so there's an old joke that lower the plow, here comes the commissar, where they collective farms, you had to produce so much every day. And people who don't really own the land, they didn't really care. So it's a bad system, like Jerry pointed out. So like I said, the Russians invaded Finland and Baltic states, and at that time my father was in the Estonian Air Force, and he helped fight against the invasion of Russia, and the German army did come in, and they occupied Poland and the Baltic states. So 1 year after the Russians invaded, we had the German army come in, and they lived in Estonia for 3 years until the Russians regrouped and got rearmed and then drove the Germans back. And at that time, the German army told my dad, said, you know, you're a military guy, you're going to be in danger, you better come with us. So in September of '44, my father and mother and then me, a 4-month-old infant, boarded the German transport ship, and we sailed to Germany. And from there, we went to Berlin. And let me just point out, though, that 10% of the country of Estonia fled as the Russians came in '44. Most of them went to Sweden. I say a lot of them went to Sweden. Others went to Denmark. My godfather sailed his own 15-foot boat to Sweden from Estonia. And so people took whatever measures they could to get out of the country. But all of my mom's sisters and my father's 4 brothers and sisters all remained behind. They were not involved in the military, and they just stayed there to bear it out. And we found out later what a difficult time they had. So the 3 of us did make it to Berlin, and then from the train station there, everybody was fleeing to get away from the Russians. So we tried to get on a train, and it was very crowded, and it was just chaos. And suddenly someone picked me from my mother's arm and pushed me through a train window. And then my mom was really upset, but she got picked up and pushed onto the train too. And my dad tried to get on board, but they were not allowing men to get on board. This is eerily reminiscent of what I've been seeing in the TV for the last couple of months of Ukraine too. Same kind of thing. Men could not leave of a certain age, and women and children were taken to train to flee the country. But so my parents were separated, and only 9 months later did they find each other in a displaced persons camp in the southern part of Germany. That ended up being the American zone of Germany. As you know, Germany was divided in 4 countries, U.S., France, Great Britain, and Russia. And of course, Russia, being the bear, took the largest portion. And so we lived the rest of the next 5 years, we lived in that DP camp, displaced persons camp, which was basically a reconverted barracks on an Air Force base that had been bombed by our allies. And so I remember growing up playing in these craters that were just like evenly spaced along a runway, and it was fun for the kids to just jump and run inside these craters. And then I also remember standing in food lines. You know, we were blessed to be in the U.S. zone, which had the best accommodations and food, although it was limited. We only ate twice a day, and then they also set up, and they tried to organize these camps by nationalities. So, like Estonians were in one place, and Lithuanians, Poles in another, and so on. But there was some intermingling. But anyway, they set up common food kitchens, schools. I remember going to kindergarten there, and then church events. I remember Christmas and Easter, and so we had a lot of the things that we had back in our country. I found out later that one of my cousins, who's a few years older than me, who remained back in Estonia, there was a lot of running gun battles going on in their capital city and in the surrounding area. And my cousin, his mom, took him into a root cellar that was on the farm and hid in that root cellar with the gun firing going on in the area. And suddenly a Soviet soldier pulled open the root cellar door and without looking just sprayed it with fire, gunfire, and a fragment went into my cousin's head, and they could never remove that bullet for fear of killing him or destroying his memory. And that was Matti, who came to visit us here in America in 1974, and he told us these stories of how the life was under the Soviets. Much like Jerry said, there was no food available, shortages. It was really a very tough time. And the Iron Curtain came down, and my mom only learned of her mother's death 7 years after it happened. So things were really shut down terribly. But Matti came, and thanks to Jim and Barb, they invited us to their farm. And I've never seen anybody so surprised when they came to their farm to see the equipment that they had, which was just enormous equipment, but also that one family like that could farm, at least at that time, I think 6,000 acres of wheat, which would have taken 100 people back in the Soviet Union to do that because of the way they have no unemployment. So they give you whatever job is going on. So this was really a big eye-opener for him to see what private property can do, ownership, and working for your own benefit. So it was really a very revealing time for him. And then in 1982, my mom and I went back to Estonia. My dad would not come. He was still on the list, you might say, because of his military activities. But then my mom and I got to go back to the farm where she grew up, and of course we only lived on that portion because it was divided up into the other families, and they had a big reception for us. It was very, very kind of them, but the other families came as well, and they were Estonian people too, and everybody was friendly. But it was, it's just like Nollmeyer's giving up part of their farm to other people indiscriminately. We did hear a lot of stories about what occupancy was like. I don't know if you can imagine this, but they have these, what they call the dollar stores, valuta stores they call it. And it's kind of like if you go downtown to Nordstrom's, and on the front door of the Nordstrom's, it says, citizens are not allowed to enter without hard currency, because they had these special stores that only took US dollars or English pounds or Deutschmarks, and there you could buy the best quality of chocolate, coffee, cigarettes, scotch, things that were not available in the normal store where you used a ruble, which was worthless money back then. And so this was kind of the segregation that you get. Socialists always talk about everybody being equal. Well, that's not true at all. They have their nomenclatura, which is the high people that get all the benefits of the best produce and all of this, cars. They even have special lanes that only government cars are allowed to drive in, so there's no blockage of those important people. So when we were there in '82, my mom was showing me all around where she used to work and so on. And it was at the doorstep of one of these dollar stores that I saw two young boys sitting on the doorstep. And I went up to the boys and I said in Estonian, I said, boys, I'll take you in there and you can buy whatever, and I'll pay for whatever you want. And they both looked at me in big surprise, and they thought about it for a second, and they both dashed off running. They figured I was a KGB agent that was trying to entice them into doing something wrong. But later I took my cousin, Matti, in there, and he went crazy with everything that he could get, and we were glad to share that with him. Like I mentioned, we were in the DP camps, and then my dad started to apply to emigrate to the U.S. He didn't want to be a ward of the state. He was a diploma engineer, mechanical engineer, and luckily we did connect with a sponsor, a factory owner in Fort Wayne, Indiana, and just like Jerry said, they paid for our passage. They gave us a home to live, which was an apartment above a barn. It was very nice, and then my mom cleaned their home, and my dad then worked for this company. It was a die casting company, and my dad hardly knew English, but luckily in engineering you just have the drawings, and you can do a lot with that without knowledge of the language. But as it happens in America, soon my dad got another offer from another company, and we had paid back all the expenses, and we left our sponsors and moved to Michigan, where we spent a number of years there. Ironically, this shows what this country can do. My dad, who was a pilot back in Estonia on a double-wing paper plane, you might say, developed here in the U.S. to work on the Apollo project that went to the moon. In his lifespan, he was born in 1899, he died in 1988, and from seeing the birth of flying to landing on the moon, in one lifetime is extraordinary. And for him to participate in that was really an example of what you can do in America when you take all the constraints away. And okay, and then in closing, Melanie and I went back to Estonia about 7 years ago. I wanted to introduce her to the new generation there. We have many relatives back there, and we really had a wonderful time. But it was so completely different from the visit my mom and I made in 1982 under Brezhnev. And now it was a free, independent country. It was completely different. It was just bright and happy, lights everywhere, a thriving economy. Estonia is known as the Silicon Valley of the old Soviet Socialist Republic. That's where Skype was developed. It's just a dynamic, fantastic place. And one of the first things the Estonians did when they got their freedom in 1991, after the Berlin Wall came down, is they took down all those Russian Cyrillic street signs, and our Estonian language signs went back up. And we have our free press, we have our parliament. One of my relatives is a member of the parliament. We got a beautiful tour of the parliament building with him. It's just so heartening to see. And now Estonia is a member of NATO and the European economy, European Union, and they are very keenly watching what's going on in Ukraine. And we're very careful or very supportive of Ukraine and trying to hold back the seemingly always hungry Russian bear. And I just want to close one thing. I'm talking about Russia a lot, but I don't mean to say the Russian people are any way like that. It's the government of the Russians that has always been the problem. The Russian people themselves individually are very warm, will give you the shirt off their back. They're just terrific people. But it's the government that is doing this. And many Russians do not support the Ukraine invasion, but they know the penalties for speaking out. So that's it. Like Jerry said, we are grateful and blessed to live in this country. We know what it could be like otherwise, and let's keep praying for our country. We have our difficulties, I know, but we're free to talk and free to discuss, and I know we can work it out. So thank you. Appreciate the opportunity.